Good evening. My name is Lisa Sprinkle, and I'm honored to be the Vice President for Hospice and Home Care Services for Carilion Clinic and President of the Board of the Roanoke Valley Palliative Partnership. And on behalf of our board and our members, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this evening of fellowship. We're here to talk about the topic of advanced care planning, and that in and of itself can feel a little overwhelming. To many, thinking about end-of-life care planning can be premature, it can feel frightening, and in some cases it can feel foreboding or inviting trouble, right? But to some of us, thinking about end-of-life care planning can actually be liberating and controlling and bring us comfort to some degree. But regardless of our feelings and emotions about end-of-life care planning, it starts with a reflection of our individual values. What's important to each of us as individual persons is a question that we should ask. Our values are shaped by many influences in our lives. That includes our system of ethics, the social norms that we're accustomed to, our culture and heritage, and the influence of those who have helped us form those impressions. Though each of us in the room may come from different backgrounds and thus have our own individual and fundamental differences, there are lots of things that we share in common. The definition of who each of us are is formed by the people that have influenced our rearing and our adulthoods. We share in common the element of humanity, so that means we all enter the world through the process of birth. We all leave the world through the process of death. But tonight we're here to celebrate our differences and embrace our similarities. Many folks have asked me about the quilt, and one of the great influencers in my life personally was my grandmother. She was a quilter, but her quilting skills were handed down from her mother and her mother's mother. She was in no ways a professional quilter. She wasn't taught professionally. She owned a sewing machine. She refused to use the sewing machine when she was quilting. My grandmother never threw away a piece of fabric. And what you see is the quilt that my grandmother gave to me 50 years ago at the age of 9. She was 79 when she quilted this. It's tattered. It may not hold the same beauty to you that it holds for me, but I can't tell you the number of nights that this quilt brought me comfort, particularly when I was in the first year of nursing school and I questioned if I was going to make it or not. But she never threw anything away. She never went to the store to buy sources or resources for her quilting talent. With one exception, she would buy the batting and she would buy the backing for the quilt. But everything else, I imagine some of my dad's pajamas are on this somewhere. My grandmother took pieces of material that most of us today would throw away, and she would make beautiful and colorful quilts. She believed that beauty availed itself through her own ensemble of pieces. She lived in the home that she raised her 7 children in, and that wasn't very far from where I lived as a kid growing up. And it was during the fall months that my mom and dad would pick me up at the bus stop, and they would take me to Grandma's for the purpose of rolling the quilt. I don't know if there's quilters in the room, but the quilts are mounted on frames, and you quilt from the side to the point that your arm can't reach the center of the quilt anymore, and then you roll the frame up so you can get to the next row of quilt squares. When we would get there, she lived in an unheated home. Most of the rooms had fireplaces or wood stoves, but we would always find Grandma in the unheated room, draped in a blanket, with gloves with the fingertips cut out, and there she would be quilting. And I learned more from her in those moments without her ever having to say a word to me. It didn't matter if she had corduroy and fleece in the same square. The difference in the texture added to the beauty. It didn't matter if she had red and purple in the same square, as you can see. The color added to the vibrancy of what she did. It didn't matter if her stitch lengths were long or short, and if there are any professional quilters in the room, you might examine that because you'll find plenty of faults in stitch length. But it spoke of her journey of learning and living. It wasn't uncommon to find a small blot of blood, though today we would reject that, right? Because she refused to sew with a thimble. And today it might be frowned upon, but to me as a child, it told me of her love and perseverance. So she taught me a lot through her talent for quilting. She taught me that difference inherently exists in the world in which we live, but beauty truly is in the eye of the beholder. Though we are made to have different shapes, sizes, designs, beauty happens when we come together. Color contributes to vibrancy and individualism, and the very differences that make us each unique create the same commonality that brings us together. So it's in that spirit of fellowship that we come together tonight to explore and respect the differences that impact advanced care planning and embrace the commonalities that we get to share. And my hope tonight is that we find beauty in the combination of color and culture as we experience the evening together. Now it is my pleasure to introduce two members of our board of the Palliative Partnership, Elaine Bryant and Laura Pohl, who have some readings to share with us.
Your quilt is poetry. Crossing the Bar by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out of our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar.
Hi, I'm Elaine Bryant, and I am going to share with you When Death Comes by Mary Oliver. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut. When death comes, like the measles pox. When death comes, like an iceberg between the shoulder blades. I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what's it going to be like? The cottage of darkness. And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And I look upon time as no more than an idea. And I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field of daisies and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending, as all music does, towards silence, and each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. When it's over, I want to say all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was a bridegroom taking the world into my arms. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I've made a life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Thank you.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Sue Ransom. Sue is the founder and CEO Emeritus of Good Samaritan Hospice and a founding member of the Roanoke Valley Palliative Partnership. She spent most of her professional career in caring for patients approaching end-of-life care as a nurse, an administrator, and a hospice executive until her retirement in 2018. And since that time, she's remained a contributing member of the Palliative Partnership. So, Sue, thank you for moderating our panel.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That one. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Laura and Elaine, for setting the stage for this important conversation tonight. I feel very honored to sit up here. You know, sometimes when you retire, you're kind of put out to pasture. But I have been graciously continued to be enfolded in this wonderful group of people who are passionate about end-of-life care, making it better for everyone, assuring that we're having the right conversations. So I would like to introduce our panel, and then we're going to have a conversation. We keep saying this is a conversation. This is a conversation. And I think there will be opportunities for people in the audience to ask questions. Am I correct, Elaine? So we will, Wendy will give me some time parameters because there I don't see a clock, but we will have time at the end. I think we'll have about 45 minutes for the panel discussion. And so let me introduce our panel. To my right is Dr. Catherine Coffey-Vega, who is with geriatric medicine at Carilion Clinic, and she is also assistant professor of medicine at Virginia Tech Carilion. Thank you for being here. We have Chaplain Cantina Martin, who is with us from the VA Medical Center. Chaplain Martin. We have Dr. Monica Coles, who is a gerontology clinical nurse specialist with Carilion Clinic. Thank you, Dr. Coles. We have Dr. Mark Swope, who is the Director of Clinical Ethics and the Assistant Professor at Virginia Tech Carilion Clinic. And we have Lucia Driscoll with us, who is a Spanish medical interpreter at Carilion Clinic. So we have a wide variety of expertise here, although I think everybody comes at this with a great deal of humility also. We were talking about that before the program, that we know what we know and not necessarily what somebody else knows. So today we're going to ask some questions of you all to share, and then we'll invite the audience. So Dr. Coffey-Vega, do you think people understand what advanced care planning means, and how would you describe it?
Thank you. I feel like there are really kind of simple descriptions of what advanced care planning is. In essence, a person really exploring what they want for their own health care and making sure that it's documented and that those who speak on their behalf, if they are not able to speak for themselves, know what they want. As a geriatrician, advanced care planning is in a way a part of every encounter with patients. It's a conversation, it's an exchange. I think of it when I really sat down and said, what are the elements that I think are critical to effective advanced care planning? I came up with 4 key elements that I think are really critical. The first would be making sure that the patient really understands what are their health conditions, what are their diagnoses, What is the course of their disease or diseases? What is their prognosis? What is their understanding? That's the basis for everything in the rest of the conversation. The second part is, what does our healthcare system do by default? Do you understand that? Do you understand that these are the things that you encounter by default, unless you tell us you want something different? The third part is really what the living will is about. Now that you understand those two elements, at the intersection of those two, what do you want when an emergency happens, when the severity of your diseases progresses? What do you not want? And that's a moving target, depending on where the patient is in the progression of their diseases. The fourth is really making sure that the person understands the concept of designating a proxy, designating someone who understands who they are and what they want and would be a staunch advocate for them if they weren't able to speak for themselves. I think the question of, do people understand advanced care planning? I have so many answers to that. I think most people have a general idea about what advanced care planning is. I think that healthcare practitioners and patients and everyone could improve on their understanding of advanced care planning. I have a little bit of data to share just in reflection on that question, which is, in recent months, the inpatient hospital or geriatrics consult service has converted a number of patients to a Pcprv plan, hospice transition, and home. And that's a part of our work because we see a lot of patients with terminal prognosis in our line of work. When I look back on the past 50 transitions to hospice to see, did they come in with advanced care planning documents, I find that about 50% did not. And yet all of these patients were at a place in their life where they actually were very receptive to the conversation that you're approaching the end of your life and that there is an alternative way to approach your care. I find that really informative, that that's where we are. And on average, those patients within 14 days had passed away. That's where we are with these patients, yet half of them did not have advanced directives. So I think the question of whether there's room for improvement or whether we understand it is just, that tells a lot when you reflect on those numbers. I think that the other question I would say is, do we understand one another? It's not, do people understand? Do we understand one another? And that is the space I come from. I had an experience in the past year where a gentleman looked at me and said, "Lady, these are your words. This is your world. I and my God know nothing about this." And that really gave me pause to say, wow, what do I know? What do I not know? What are we really talking about? And I think that's just such an important illustration of what we're talking about today. Thank you.
So you also speak to the humility side of it, that we make
Absolutely.
assumptions, but that also having those conversations is sometimes freeing, that people want to have them, but
Absolutely.
they maybe don't understand them and don't understand what happens when they do.
Right.
So thank you for those insights. Thank
Absolutely.
you. So the next question I want to address to Mr. Skull and Dr. Coles, and my first question is, what comprises culture? And then, why do you think it's important to discuss the influence of culture on healthcare decisions?
Well, culture is multidimensional and it affects health disparities, communication, and interactions in the doctor-patient relationship, the illness experience, and health outcomes. We can't just simply provide an interpreter for a patient in need and think that is all there is. The influence of culture helps doctors to recognize the multiple social statuses that shape their patients' beliefs, values, and their behaviors. Because older generations do not yet grasp the concept of the patient doctor relationship or the partnership. They believe more in an authoritarian type of an approach, whereby the doctor tells them what to do and they do it or not. Um, there's been all this talk about cultural competence, which has an air of arrogance to it. And I think that focus needs to be shifted to one of cultural humility, whereby it helps the doctor to appreciate the lay expertise of their patients and help them to be open to share power with their patients and learn from them. Because if we don't meet the patients where they are, we can't help them to be well in the now.
Okay.
Well, I'm Hispanic, so a lot of the stuff that we talk here, I live it myself as a Hispanic and coming from another country. I'm no expert in any means and cultural and belief or as a Hispanic population. I'm trying always to be sensitive to their needs and understand every single aspect of their life to better care for them. The Hispanic population, about the Roanoke Valley, and talking about advanced care planning, they don't know what that is. They have no clue what we're talking about. They don't even have a PCP. They, if they get sick or something is going on with them, they come to the emergency room and do it quick. You know, give me the pill that is gonna make me better quick because I have to go back to work. If the doctor tell me you cannot work for 7 days or forget it, they're not gonna comply. They're not gonna complain with the recommendations of the doctor. Adding to that, there's a lot of social issues the Hispanic population have. The cultural belief, what religious belief in me for them. A lot of the Hispanic population use folk medicine. If you don't know that is, they use healers and what we call curanderos. They auto-diagnose themselves, and I have many patients that come to the ED and they already tell me what's going on with them or what they believe was going on, you know. And I always say, hold on 1 second. Yes, tell me your symptoms. Don't tell me what it is. Yes, let the doctor do the job, you know. It's every single day. When it comes to talk today about end of life, healthcare planning, they look at me like I have 3 heads. Start from that. And if you're gonna talk to a patient and say, okay, this is what is going on with you. You are in the end of life process. We are not gonna be able to help you. It's no medicine, doesn't exist. I said, well, no, you're not God, forget it. It's only God, or it's my punish. God is punishing me for what I did, and that's why I'm sick. Or maybe it's gonna raise me up and it's gonna save me. And I'm gonna tell a case of that kind of involve everything that is in the Hispanic population without saying names, obviously. We have, a few months ago, an absolute palliative got involved in the care of that little boy. I'm listening to you guys and it's always talk about adults, elder people. We have this 14-year-old boy with some genetic disease coming from Honduras. In Honduras, they used to call him the special kid. No clue what was going on with him. So it got to the point that mom wasn't able to get the health care that he needed. And he lost his ability to walk, his ability to eat, and no resources whatsoever to help the poor boy. So mom decided to put him in a wheelchair in pieces because I cannot even tell you what it looks like. And she pushed that boy for a month, all the way from Honduras until she got here to cross the border. The Rio Grande, famous Rio Grande for the illegal immigrants, one of the coyotes are the people that they pay money to help him cross the border illegally. Well, this is a little boy in a wheelchair. So one of the coyotes put him in his shoulder to try to cross the Rio Grande so they won't drown. Finally, after so many intents, mom crossed the border, and where they end? Roanoke Memorial Hospital in the ED. So when they show up in the ED, I was so confused, and I'm like, wait a second, what is it that you need? Oh, that he need a feeding tube and he needs a shunt because he have hydrocephalus. I said, oh, wait a second. So trying to get to what was going on. So I spent so many hours with that mom trying to figure it out because she can't even tell me what was going on with that boy. Nothing. Every single provider from Carilion, from Children's, got involved in his care. At every single specialty. And at the end, he had a terminal disease, nothing we can do for them. And so mom came and brought the boy to United States for him to die. So hospice got involved, palliative care hospice got involved, and just to give him a better quality of life for what he had, the time that he had. Having that conversation with mom after what she went through to bring that boy here to save him, it was one of the more painful things that I have to witness in my entire life. That gave me the example and the courage to be able to help people. And I was with that mom 24/7 until that boy died. And even when they sent him back to Honduras, sent his remains back to Honduras, I was through Facebook watching the whole funeral. The whole entire town came to the funeral with music and what they call marimbas and singing and flowers everywhere to just celebrate his life. And mom, obviously, here. She have to watch it in a video too. So healthcare plan is just not for older people, it's for everyone. And coming from another culture with language barrier, with different belief, is something that you have to spend the time and listen. Listen. So to better care for them.
Wow. I am so thankful that you were there to walk that journey with them. Because you brought up a good point, is that it's not just hard on the people going through it, it's hard on the healthcare providers too. And so thank you. And that kind of segues a little bit into the next question for Dr. Swope, and that is about potential barriers to discussing options for care, especially at the end of life.
Thank you. One of the things I stress consistently, continuously, and cannot overstress, I think, with young people 18 and older, are to have some conversations, to have an advance directive, a living will, because you don't know what life happens. Accidents happen. Something that might not be planned, something that might not be terminal, but I could leave here tonight and God forbid, but I could get into a car accident. So no matter how old you are, 18 and older, excuse me, particularly, really need to have some planning. There's multiple national examples of folks that kind of prompted advance directives, the reason why we have them. I'll just give the example of one, Terry Schiavo. I give this because Terry Schiavo, it happened in 1990. Terry and Michael Shivo, they were married, a married couple. And Michael grew up in the same neighborhood as I did. I did not know Michael. I had met him later, and at a conference that he was presenting at. But Michael and Terry were married in Pennsylvania. They moved to Florida and moved into a condo that Terry's parents had. Unfortunately, as most times, Michael suspected that Terry was anorexic, which is a very secretive disease, as you know, and he suspected it, but it was not clinically diagnosed. So one morning he came down, and in the kitchen he found Terry unresponsive on the floor. And he said that, she was drinking a lot of iced tea, not eating well. She had kind of struggled with weight in her life. And so she was unresponsive. And so, he calls the EMTs, of course, and, they resuscitate her, but not knowing how long she was without, oxygen and laying on the floor, they didn't know. So they clinically diagnosed her as being in a persistent vegetative state. So this is in 1990. In 1997, in between, she's in an institution. She has a feeding tube, which is key to the story. And Michael went to nursing school because he thought maybe I can take care of her, bring her home. But he did that for a while, but that didn't work out. She needed so much care. And he said, it's been so many years, and they were back and forth with her diagnosis. They were trying to figure out what was going on. And he said, Terry would not want to live like this. But unfortunately, it was the very beginning of advance directives, and Terry didn't have one. She didn't have any written document stating what her values were if a situation might arise in this occasion. So Michael said, we need to remove the feeding tube. The doctors, we've been through so many doctors, so many years, and I really thought she was going to get better. But Terry would not want to live like this. We've had this discussion, and she pointed to me that she would not want to do this. So Terry's parents objected to this. They thought, no, they were very staunch religious Catholics. He said, no, it goes against our religion. We cannot remove the feeding tube. That would be killing our daughter. Her quality of life is fine, so on and so forth. Michael, being the spouse, of course, had the right to make this decision. But like anything, you can take anybody to court for over anything, right? You can always object, and this is in the early stages in the 90s, 1990. So it went to court, and Michael petitioned the court in 1997, or it started the process. In 2001, her feeding tube was removed. So many years later it took to remove the feeding tube. But after an injunction and after a judge overruled it, the feeding tube was replaced. That was the first time it happened. Terry ends up dying in 2005, but it was such a national depiction. If you remember anything, or if you remember reading things on it, the president got involved, Congress got involved. This was a very private person who I'm sure, as Michael said, would never want this kind of publicity, but it was national news at the time, even international, unfortunately. But the judge wanted to know clear, convincing evidence of what Terry's wishes, what her values were. Would Terry want to live this way, or would she feel that, would not want to live this way? Would it be considered extraordinary care? So Michael was able to convince the judge at that point, and her feeding tube was removed, and she did pass away about 11 days later. But it's just an indication, not having anything written of the consequences that can cause for any age of folks. So I just always use that as one example, and there's multiple others. But I say, please do your family a favor, give them a gift. You don't want your family fighting in court over, what your values or your wishes were or are, because you're unable to communicate them yourself. And so you have, your next of kin, or you have your, power of attorney speaking for you. So please, fill out an advance directive, a living will. It's so, so important. It can save your family a lot of turmoil, and it can hopefully honor your wishes and how you see your end of life being.
So it's not just for older people, you're saying that?
Absolutely, and there are multiple examples. Unfortunately, bad things happen to good people. Accidents happen. So we never, never, ever know. And, we put things off, whether it's a financial will or whether it's a living will, advance directive for medical decision making, whatever it is, do your family a favor, have the conversation. Advance directive is something that you can do yourself. It's a very simple process. You can go online. There's multiple examples. In the state of Virginia, you only need 2 witnesses to sign it, that you're the one that filled it out. You sign it and you date it. It is a legal document. We are ethically and medically obligated, legally obligated to fulfill your living will, to abide by it. It doesn't take a lawyer. So please fill one out.
And I think that just about all of the court cases that decided who has the right to make a decision were over young people.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. The Karen Ann Quinlan.
The Karen Ann Quinlan, her parents eventually started or helped to start hospice in New Jersey. But certainly, they were all young people that are examples of not having something in writing, not having an advance directive, not having a living will. So please, no matter how old you are, if you're 18 and older, please think about it, fill something out, because, to put your parents in a position, your family members, other folks, your partner, whoever it might be, to have it writing, because the judge always wants to know clear, convincing evidence of what your values are. So without a written document, your family or whoever is advocating for you, will need to do that.
Right. So, Chaplain Martin, how does trust or lack of trust in the healthcare system influence decision making around these issues?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's a very challenging one. As I listened to what you were saying, as Dr. spoke about, I wish it were as easy as just doing the document, but it's often not that easy. I think the disparities that have happened around racism, around lack of medical care, especially for people that look like me. I'm a Black woman. And I definitely think that has played a part in how we trust not only healthcare systems, but all of the other institutional systems. I believe that, and these are personally just my views. I can't speak for all of Black America, but I definitely believe that health is a social construct. I think all of who I am plays a part in my decisions. Everything that I've heard, the music I listen to, my culture, what we believe, my faith, all of it has something to do with whether I will or will not complete an advance directive. If we can go back as far as, and I didn't want to bring up the United States public health system on the untreated syphilis, all of that happened in 1932. I think even when penicillin was discovered in 1947 that could treat those that had syphilis, they weren't given the treatment. So there's a mistrust there. And when the pandemic happened, all I heard about was, you remember Tuskegee, you remember Tuskegee. So that was a real thing for our community. But I want to make it more than just about that, because to say that that's the root of it will ignore the racism that we face every day. The George Floyd that happened, and that continues to happen. It affects us, and it affects how we continue to trust or not trust. when someone that looks just like someone that killed George Floyd now wants me to sign a document and put my trust there. It doesn't happen that easily. I'll give you my own personal story. I had to have surgery, major surgery in 2020. And I had avoided this surgery for a number of years. I found out about a benign tumor in 2008. And so, because of my own personal religion, because of my story and who I am as a person, because of my own culture and what I believe about God, I did not want to have this surgery. I didn't really believe that was what was needed for me. And so for a number of years, I did not have the surgery. And then in 2020, so from 2008 to 2020, I still believe that God helped me, that God kept me because I didn't need it and I did well. But in 2020, something else was happening in my body and I knew that something was happening. I knew that I needed to address a situation. And so when I had a really good doctor. At this time, my education had significantly increased. I've worked in healthcare a number of years, started in healthcare from like age 18. So I've been around the healthcare system and I knew about healthcare, yet I still did not want to trust people with my body. It was a whole trust issue for me. So and I'll tell you, I worked with this health system before that took good care of me when it was time for me to have the surgery. But my first thought, and before I submitted to having the surgery, was, I know this system, I know these people. It's mostly white people. Are they going to take care of me? Do I trust that if I'm on the table and something happens to me, are they going to see me as just a black body? Or are they going to do all they can do for me? And what shifted for me, what helped me make the decision to let this amazing doctor do a big surgery on me? Because the morning that I arrived at Carillion for my surgery, I was still saying, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing it. But the doctor came and he sat beside me. He knew I had called the day before. I canceled it. They said, no, we don't cancel surgeries. We don't cancel big surgeries. I knew that I was the first case. If you know anything about big surgeries, you know you're going to be the first case. So anyway, making this a shorter story. He sat beside me that morning and spent 30 additional minutes with me, just getting to know me and talking to me and helping me. And then he said one thing to me that helped me. He said, if you don't have the surgery today, I want you in my office next week. So that we can talk about what we need to do about your situation so I can help you through it and we can figure out another solution. And that statement helped me to know that he cared about me, that I wasn't just another surgery, but he really did care about me. And it helped me to put my trust in God, but it helped me to put my trust in God through a surgeon. And he took such excellent care of me. I had no issues, no worries, but I really needed his extra care so that I could feel like he was someone that cared about me, because I knew where I was. And it's a reality. It's a real thing that I think about all the time. And I'm sure other people do too, is can we trust the people that we are putting our lives on the line for? And so that's how I'd answer that. Trust definitely has been broken, not just in healthcare, but in all the systems that we work in. And it matters how we're seen. It matters how we're repairing. It matters how we're welcoming. It matters who we see at the head of the table. If we always see the same people all the time, how do we know that that structure is going to work for us? And so, it's a real issue for me, and that's how I'll end that. Thank you.
Wow, that's a hard story for us to hear, for us to hear. It's right where we are, and but we have to.
Yeah.
We have to hear those
Yeah.
stories, and he listened to you.
did.
He left you in
He did.
charge with
Yes.
sometimes we don't do that. So, so our next question has to do with what happens when you see families who have to make decisions, but they don't understand how their loved one would want to be cared for? And I'm going to start with you, Sister.
Okay, so for the Hispanic population, is understanding what the care is and talking about end of life. You have to involve the whole entire family, the pastor, the neighbors, the cousin, the lady from the store, my dad goes there every morning to get the eggs, and she knows my dad really well, so you have to get her involved. So and they give you the opinion, and it's fights, and nobody agree with the other one, none, because come on, you're in the United States. We have the best care here. What are you telling me? How can you tell me that they cannot do anything for my dad? Tell me that in my country. But here, come on. So getting that trust for them it takes a lot. It takes a lot. And it have to be for the family to agree to end of life situations. It's almost like the patient have to really be in the end of life situation for them to see, okay, yeah, he's suffering. Okay, he's suffering, we gotta let him go. But imagine all of this when the family is not even here. And then they're in another country, because a lot of our Hispanic population, they're here by themselves. The working men, they come to make the money to provide for the families back at home. So, like during COVID, that was the Hispanic population got hit so badly with COVID because they live in communities. So it's like 8 guys living in an apartment. They all work in construction. What isolate yourself, forget about it. You know, I have to go to work, because if I don't go to work, I cannot send the money home. My family won't eat. So, and COVID was something that nobody understand. The doctors at the hospital, everything was so new for all of us. So how can you explain that to a family that is in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Guatemala? And getting the communication, start from that. Getting the connection in the phone, trying to get them go to the corner of the store so they can have a little bit of Wi-Fi, because they have to communicate to something they call WhatsApp, not regular phone. WhatsApp is my best friend now. Everybody is no private. I don't know if it's private or not. I have no clue, but it's the only way that they can communicate. And I have to call a lot of times out of the country. And if you call directly through the Caribbean operator, it won't work. But if I call through WhatsApp, they answer immediately. Why? No clue, but it works. So explaining to that family in another country what's going on with their loved one, and there is nothing we can do for them. And then they get to the moment of the end of life, or they have to withdraw care, and this is a person all by himself in the room with the nurse and me. That's it. Holding hands. In one hand I have the patient's hand, and the other one the phone with the family in a video, screaming and crying in the country. And then you gotta deal with what we're gonna do with the body. You know, how we gonna send it back, how that family is gonna afford to send the body back. So then I have to call the embassy of whatever country that is and ask for help to do what they call repatriation of the body. So it's a whole entire process that nothing that we do here would qualify for them enforcement. And we have a broken system, you know, at Carilion, we do everything for these patients. Everything. Out of Carilion, nothing. Nothing. And the patients don't have insurance. They don't have support system in the community. They cannot afford to pay, not even for oxygen. I found out not long ago there is no free oxygen anymore to take home with a patient if it's not hospice. If it's hospice, it's another story. But that's it. So it's no resources outside of the hospital at all. And it's pretty sad because we do what we can to help the patient, but they get out of our doors and that's it. They be back a week later. So it's a very broken system here.
You have a very critical role to play. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Certainly, trust is a big issue, whether in medicine or across the world. And I certainly, it's certainly something that we address in the medical school with all clinicians. Relationships, communication, right? You know, and one of the things that the Self-Determination Act of 1990 has tried to address is that, giving people the right to make their own choices, whether or not they want certain treatments, because we did, grow up with a very paternalistic society. Um, and, so we're now it's all dialogue, or hopefully, that's what we're trying to do is dialogue, communication, relationship, because people have a right to refuse treatment of any sort, even if it is life sustaining, even if, you understand the risk and the consequences, or whether you do or you don't, it's still your right to refuse that treatment. Um, One of the things with COVID that kind of came about here in Roanoke was I was lucky to participate in a statewide with all other ethicists, other ethics folks in the state to come up with a framework, an ethical framework of if your institution came to the point where you had the ration, right? Like a vent or something, because other places were doing it and were rationing. What is your framework? What are you basing it on? Who gets a vent and who doesn't? Does a physician get a vent first before, a patient, or if they need one? You know, and, so one of the things that we came up with was a framework and a policy to follow that, God forbid, if we did have to, luckily we did not come to that point here in Roanoke area with vents. Certainly there are some other drugs, and there are some drugs that we actually do have to ration because of lack of supply. But getting back to, the COVID, and hopefully, and that's one of the reasons why I have a job is that, what is fair? What is a framework to kind of say, hey, if something as drastic as rationing happens, what do you base that criteria on? And who makes those decisions? So luckily, all institutions in Virginia have come up with their own policies, of course, to kind of suit their needs. But something that, we constantly talk about is making sure in healthcare that it's fair, that it's equitable. How do we do that? Where aren't we doing that? Where's the discussion going? Where do we need to have more discussion? And so on and so forth. So, I think it, comes down to conversations with providers to make sure, that you understand, that it's clear. And if it's not, you ask questions. Because, you need to understand what the treatment option is or not getting the treatment option. getting it or not getting it. You need to be very clear in your head what that means for you. And, you need to make the decision, and that's what, we aspire to in healthcare is making sure that somebody who understands can make those decisions, they make those decisions on their own and only that.
I think it's actually a whole message. I think in the.
All trust and transparency. We're always talking about transparent, put it out there, make sure people know and understand,
Right. So Chaplain Martin, do you think that people are reluctant or afraid to have the conversation because they think it might hasten their death or the progression of their disease?
Well, I don't know if we don't want to talk about it, but why talk about something that we don't want to happen, right? I don't know that anyone really wants to talk about death. But with my expertise and what I see in my world and where I work, I'm certainly an advocate for advanced care planning. A huge advocate for that. I talk to my family and my friends about that all the time because of what I see, especially in hospice care. And the challenge it is to then do that work when it's really late and it can be hard to get the right paperwork done. So I know for me and my family and the people that I talk to, we never like to talk about death. And I'm around death all the time and wanting to be a death doula and all of this, and I don't know how that happens, but I love being with and journeying with people at that sacred, very sacred time of life. So I've come to honor God in that space, and so no longer afraid of that. As I had to also face, because I think we first face our own mortality and we think about what might happen to us and how we might experience it and what kind of death we want. I know now that there's a good death, there's a bad death, and there's a way to die well if you're dying. And so I'm a huge advocate for making sure that you think about the kind of death that you want to have. And so, no, we don't like to talk about it. Especially in faith, we believe God is going to protect us from death. My husband passed away in 2020, and he always said, of all the people in the Bible that that God healed, how many of them are still living? And I thought, well, I guess because that's a real question. Death is part of life,
Sure.
And so, yeah.
Sure. The only people that like to talk about are people in hospice, and even we have even we hesitate sometimes.
Yeah.
So Dr. Coles, talk about removing hope as a concept when it comes to end of life conversations. Do you think that people feel that when we want to have this conversation, we're just taking away hope from them?
I personally don't feel that way because I am a healthcare provider. But I understand how it can happen, and research doesn't really support that with the mere mention of advanced care planning that hope is taken away. But again, it can happen. And the issue again is trust. Now I have to tell my story. So on July 6th, my brother, 64 years old, suffered a brainstem stroke. And we initially made him a DNR. And then we rescinded it because we didn't have all the facts. The entire team had never come in to talk to us. I, based on what I know, knew that it was not a good situation, that it was a catastrophic injury. But he had children. And his, 3 children his youngest daughter was out of the country. And his son and his oldest daughter were there and looking to me for answers because they weren't getting any from the healthcare team. So, we had asked for a palliative consult, and it occurred 8 days later. And we asked this question, why are you just now coming? And your main focus is to tell us you really need to make him a DNR and make him comfortable. And that isn't what we're ready for. We see him
breathing over the ventilator when we're talking to him. We saw him, move some of his extremities, and when he was coughing, raise his shoulders up. And he did not have any renal failure, no cardiac failure, no cardiac events. And we asked the question, you don't know him. You've not come into this room to talk to us, to get to know him in any form or fashion. And you want us to just make him a DNR. So what? You can forget about him and just, not give him any care whatsoever, because that is what we believe would happen. So I think that if there is no trust and you don't develop a relationship with someone that you are trying to ask to implement an advanced care plan or a DNR status for their loved one, it's not going to happen. Hope is suggestive of reality. And if we tell our patients that they need to be realistic, or tell our patients' families that they need to be realistic and not have hope, it's not going to bode well. We're going to have patients that are in hospital for months on end on ventilators, like you said, tying up beds that someone else in an acute care situation needs, or using some equipment that someone else needs, because we haven't done our due diligence to make our families feel comfortable enough to understand what's going on and help them know that you're going to support them and take care of your loved one, regardless of the color of their skin, their nationality, or anything else.
So you weren't given a chance to talk about what you hoped for him.
Correct.
Yeah. And so part of our role as healthcare people is to facilitate those conversations about hope and what you mean. Thank you for that. Thank you. So, Dr. Swope, what happens when somebody doesn't have an advance directive? And they can't speak for themselves, because I want to make that clear. People think that if I sign an advance directive, I'm giving away my right to make decisions, and that's not true.
Not at all. You never give your right up to speak or to communicate your wishes or what you would want for your healthcare treatment. I mean, I've had people, blink, squeeze your hand, whatever it takes, right? If somebody can communicate in any way. So that's not it. But if somebody is unable to, if they're in a persistent vegetative state, or if they're in a coma or something, or they're just unable to speak for themselves, then we go to the next of kin. If they haven't appointed somebody as their medical power of attorney for healthcare. So you can appoint anybody as your medical power of attorney for healthcare, and that's included usually on a living will. We'll say I appoint, my spouse so-and-so to be my medical power of attorney. In the event that they're not available, I may appoint somebody else as a secondary. Because sometimes we've seen where, like, somebody that we would appoint might, has unfortunately deceased themselves or something, So we need to keep up with our advance directive and who we appoint as our medical power of attorney. It's very, very important to make sure that who you appoint as your medical power of attorney, that they're going to fulfill your wishes, they know your values. You don't want to appoint somebody who's unable to fulfill that, who might be conflicted. And that could be maybe your spouse, maybe, your children or your parents, whoever. I know when the Determination Act came in 1990, and advance directives became a legislative thing nationally, my mother, who was a physician assistant, she, was aware, and I think she might have been the first one in line to get one, because she had an advance directive, like I didn't even know what they were. And she's like, this is my wishes in case something happens to me. And she says, I'm appointing Aunt Pat as my medical power of attorney. I'm like, Mom, you have a husband, you have children. Hello, I'm here. Why aren't you, considering one of us? And she said, because I don't want to put the family in that kind of a situation. Aunt Pat, her sister-in-law, she says, I've had the conversation with her. She knows my values, she knows my wishes, and I don't want to conflict the family. Because I've seen in my field, families that have been conflicted and struggle with that. It tears families apart, when they don't agree on goals of care. So it's I think, very important to appoint somebody who's going to honor your wishes. I mean, I've seen, a brother and a sister. So if you have a brother and a sister, it's 50-50 split. The sister was like, I know mom wouldn't want this, but my brother's insisting it. And I don't want to lose my mother and my brother, so we're just going to go ahead and do it. Well, that's not going, with your mom's wishes, but I certainly understand. It's heart-wrenching. Families get into these situations where they don't agree. And if you don't appoint somebody as your medical power of attorney in the state of Virginia, it goes to a hierarchy system. So first it would be your legal spouse, okay? And if you have a spouse that you haven't legally divorced in 20 years, they may come back in 20 years and be asked to make decisions for you medically. So you want to be careful with that. We don't have common law in Virginia. So if you don't legally separate that, or at least petition the court, if you petition and if you're in the process of a divorce, then they are no longer able to make medical decisions for you. So it goes to your spouse. If you don't have a spouse, or if you are divorced, then it would go to your children. And again, if you have 2 children, it's the majority rules, so to speak. So if you have 5 children, and if 3 agree with the goals of care treatment, then it goes with the 3. And that can tear kids apart, right? And then after that, if you don't have children, it would go to your parents. Again, a 50-50 split with parents. Mom and dad both have to agree of what the goals of care would be, or what the treatment option, should be chosen. So that's why one of the reasons why you want to fill out an advance directive, to put something in writing, to name somebody as your medical power of attorney. And again, I know it's a hard thing to do, but it puts something in writing, and it certainly, to me, and I've seen it tear families apart, it really gives a gift to your family. Help them out, in troubling times when you're unable to speak for yourself and unable to make those decisions.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Dr. Coffee Vega to address the last 2 questions in a way, because I think they kind of tie in. But one has to do with how does lack of knowledge regarding options impact decision making, which we see all the time. People say, I didn't know. And then the last question is, how can you facilitate advanced care planning? And I think they tie in a little bit.
Absolutely.
If you would
My
address
battery died.
Uh-oh. We have a backup.
It's like we're down to the 5-minute mark. I love this question because this is such an important element of what we in geriatrics do every day in the hospital, which is exploring with patients who present with advanced disease their options, which include not pursuing all of the things that we're putting on the table by default. And that's such an important conversation in things like advanced dementia, where actually we think the preferred approach to care for very advanced dementia patients would be to avoid hospitalization. Hospitalization can be brutal for these patients. They develop delirium, they get agitated. It's not a comfortable experience for the patients or their families. And putting all the options on the table for these patients is so critical and often not done by default. So the option to not only have the right to refuse care, but also be guided into the decision not to accept care because it's not indicated or appropriate for this particular patient is so liberating. It is so incredibly, we see just faces of relief every day from families who have lovingly been caring for these patients with advanced dementia. So not only is this an experience, but this has been studied. There's actually, this is an article, if I ever have a chance to talk about it, I do. In 2009, there was an article in the New England Journal about the clinical course of advanced dementia. And it is a beautiful description of what happens in advanced dementia and all of the things that arise: pneumonias, swallowing difficulties, falls, behaviors, medication side effects. And it outlines that when these patients are hospitalized, they actually are they live less time, they have a poor quality of end of life. And when you talk to caregivers about this and teach them this and say, hey, we actually think hospitalization is burdensome for these patients, those caregivers are much less likely to bring their loved one into the emergency room and into the hospital. And the quality of care is so much better. Managing in place and just putting loving arms around these patients and taking good care of them is so critical. So there's good evidence that if we share all the options with people, they'll do things that are different from our default a lot. I think that that is such a critical part of not only what we need to do in healthcare to adjust our approach, but also in this other question, what suggestions do I have to help facilitate advanced care planning conversations in our diverse community, empowering families and patients to say, does this serve me? I mean, I know you guys do this, but is it going to help me? And just ask the question. A lot of our consults come from smart daughters and sons saying, does this serve my mom or dad? Yeah. And we get called from the emergency department. They say, hey, this is a good geriatrics person, patient to see. So I think these do tie together. I think that onus is also on us to really open up the conversation to all the options and not just the default. We have a lot of work to do.
We do, and just sometimes saying, what do you know about your disease? What do you know about is a good way to start that conversation. And we have the saying in hospice, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Right. And carried that with me for life. So I want to thank our panelists. We're not quite done yet because I think, do we have any questions from the audience that you would like to ask? We've got the experts up here. They won't say they are, but you've heard their stories. Anybody want to raise their hand?
Yeah, can you hear me? That you can repeat my question?
Sure.
So I would be interested to hear from the panel what their perception is of how lack of advanced care planning, crisis in a family situation, how that impacts the grieving process.
Great question. Sharon wants to know how lack of preparation, lack of advanced care planning, lack of the conversations, because it doesn't have to be a form, it's the conversation that's important. How does that impact the grief process afterward? So
I think it delays it and can often make it complicated because they have to work through those issues of their issues before they can even begin that process.
I think that guilt is a major driver to make decisions to avoid guilty feelings later. And it really is not the space we want people to be operating in. It really is painful for people to fear guilt.
Yeah.
I think I've certainly, have dealt with families after someone has passed away, and it's not having those conversations like that have provided or have given them the guilt. They're like, gee, if only I had talked to mom, we had talked about this, or I would feel better about the decisions that we made. So it's conversation, to help with that guilt. Because that is such a big part of the grieving process in the sense, of knowing, we did our best, we did what mom would want, we did what dad, we talked about this, it's such a relief, such a sense of, and they can move on with the grief process.
So, one of the things that I wanna share with you guys, families in the Hispanic population are very important. And like I said before, they get very, very involved in medical decisions. Like you all know, it's a huge language barrier. That's why we have interpreters. Not any interpreters, they have to have a professional interpreter. You don't want to use the family because a lot of families obviously they don't trust. They won't expect that they're gonna say that your loved ones is in the end of life process. So they bring the girl from high school to speak completely bilingual, speak English, and or the aunt or whoever, a child, to interpret it for the family. So we are blessed at Carilion that we have interpreters in not just Spanish, in many languages, in person. So that human touch cannot be replaced, first of all. And second, you have to get the patient a voice. We have one doctor in palliative, Dr. Pyle. Phillips, I don't know if Phillips is here, but I don't know if you can you remember him. That's one of the things that I learned from him. You always have to get the patient a voice. And you'll be surprised when you talk to them and you explain the situation in a proper way, they will make their own decision, even if it's against what the family's wishes are. And they have to respect that. So always, if there's a person from another culture, another country, always use an interpreter and don't put that burden in the family.
I was just going to add to everything else that's been said. Because grief has so many components, I think the residue that's left after a family has lost someone that did not have advanced care planning, I just think it's extra hard on the family, on the guilt, all the extra things that come up when you haven't had time to think about someone and the process that's happening for you. And I'll say this one last thing about personal experience. My mom lost a good friend, and she was able then to tell us exactly, and we've been asking, but she now knows exactly what she wants, and now we know. And it didn't make her think that she's going to die early. It took away all of that for her. She just said, I don't want that experience. I want this, and this is what I want. And we were able to hear that from her. So I think when you have the advanced care planning, it doesn't mean you don't have faith. It doesn't mean that God's not there. It just means that this is what I want, and I'm going to put that aside, and when the time comes, it's here. But it does allow the family to know what's there, to be relieved of having to figure it out, to know whether they want chest compressions or no, all the things. And it really matters, and it helps that grief process along rather than add to the hardness of it, So.
Any final words?
Oh, I thought when I saw the subject on this panel and this opportunity, I just thought this is such a long time coming for me. I feel like we simplify the concept of advanced care planning to just here's your set of documents and here's what you're doing. And it's so much more complex than that. And we just miss the mark so often because we aren't listening, and we stand in this position of authority about how this is supposed to be done. And I mean, the more I practice medicine, the more I know that's just not true. So I just really appreciated this opportunity and all the beautiful people on the stage and learning from each of you. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, it's, again, communication, talking about it all the time, right? I think somebody said, you don't want to be the person always be talking about the bad stuff.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the good stuff. I want to talk about this, because, I want this kind of experience, and I just want you to be aware of it in case, if something happens and I can't speak for myself. And one of the things I wanted to mention too, I forgot to mention, was the next of kin. So if you don't appoint somebody as your medical power of attorney, then it goes to your next of kin. As I said, it starts with your spouse, goes to your children, go to your parents, and then it goes to another blood relative. If there is nobody, no other blood relative that you have, then unfortunately, for these kind of tough decisions, we have to get a judicial authorization. We have to get a judge involved and have a hearing at the bedside. Where there's a lawyer appointed for the patient, but usually the patient can't communicate, obviously, otherwise we'd be talking to the patient. So, then a judge has to go based on the medical recommendation, of what the treatment plan or goals of care should be. And that to me is heart wrenching, you know? So for folks who don't have family or somebody, you know, to be able to do that, to please fill out a form that says I appoint somebody as my medical power of attorney for healthcare decisions. Because if not, it could end up in the decision of a judge, you know, to weigh in on that, and that's heart wrenching for me, you know, to think that you know it ends that way. So please communicate, have the conversations. You know, you can't speak about it enough, I think.
Dr. Coles, there's some parting, and then we'll be close, and we'll close this out.
I concur with what Mark just said. Working with the older adults, I see this on a daily basis. You know, our dementia patients or our older adults who have outlived their siblings and their children are forgotten. You know, they get admitted to the hospital. They may be out wandering somewhere and someone picks them up and brings them to the hospital and they have no one to advocate for them. And it is a long, drawn out process. It's a 45-day process to get Medicaid. And then we have to seek guardianship, which is another process. And sometimes these patients are hospitalized. I've had patients that have been hospitalized for in excess of a year, waiting on placement, waiting on these factors to fall into place so someone can make decisions for them. So please, please help your elder adult parents, grandparents make these decisions so that, as Mark said, someone else does not have to make them for them. Thank you so much.
I think we have a question. Right here. Yes, ma'am. I actually have some comments, if that's all right. I'm one of the palliative care doctors in the hospital. My name is Kate Tolhurst, and thank you so much. Thank you. For anyone who didn't hear, I'm one of the palliative care doctors in the hospital at Carillion, and advanced care planning is a huge passion of mine, huge, and I'm so happy to be here. And I didn't even know about this organization until recently, and I would love to join and I'm on this mission. And I have a particular interest in disparities and inequities because of some of the things I was seeing. And I just jotted down a few points that I don't think I've covered, and I apologize if I missed it. But the trust piece is so huge. And one of the reasons I think this kind of meeting is good, this kind of community discussion, and how I would love to be involved in more of this. While I know, like you said, you don't just sign a document, there's trust involved even in that part, rightly so. But if we wait till we're in a crisis, which is where I come in, our team comes in, like in your situation, then things are exponentially harder and the trust is even more on edge. And again, rightly so. The palliative care team is largely white, and there are cultural differences that have to be taken into consideration. But if we can give the freedom and power up front and have these discussions in communities, then it's less of a problem when you get to those crisis periods. One of the two other things that kind of just comes to my mind, and this was sort of covered, if you have a long-term life partner, they get no rights for your medical decisions. So if you have that, if you have a partner, and you want them to be your decision maker, that has to be right. It'll go to their kids next, and their parents and their siblings, and there will be no rights if they're not legally married. So that's huge. And another final thing is that the name on that document, that is legal, that will not change unless you change it yourself. Mm-hmm. The rest of the advanced directive, meaning I would want life belonging measures versus comfort measures, that's a guide. That can be actually overridden by your decision maker. And so it's super important, as you all have said over and over again, communicate, because the person you have named to make your decision needs to know what your values are, even if they might have changed So for example, I have an advanced directive now. I'm in my 40s, I have a little kid. If I got rapidly progressive dementia in my 50s or 60s, my goals would be entirely different. But I trust my husband to know the difference. And not to just go apply verbatim what I know. So thank you for sharing.
Would you please join me in expressing our gratitude and appreciation to the panel? As you part this evening, please know that there are some resources here at the front tables. We also have trained advanced care planning facilitators to answer questions, to help you in any way, shape, or form that you may need that. And then as we leave this place this evening, let me just remind you, I always feel like we have to have a call to action. And my request is that we don't end the conversation here tonight, that we leave with the understanding that we're all mortal beings. We have to embrace the fact that we are all going to be in the decision-making position at some point. Let us collectively not only acknowledge that, but challenge our providers to engage in conversation with us. Oftentimes, it's the provider with whom we've had a long relationship that's sometimes the most difficult individual to engage in conversation, but you have the power to challenge that. And then finally, I want to revisit the 4-letter word that we talked about, and that is hope. And we will always have hope in the fact that even though we have to acknowledge at times that our earthly body cannot be repaired, the relationships, the people that we hold most dear, those things that are most important to us, those things carry us through that process. And so I want you to leave tonight knowing that suffering doesn't have to occur. It's been acknowledged many times tonight, we're in a highly medicalized environment. We have a society that appreciates and values medicine. And with that, treatments can be delivered that might not have the goal of healing the body, but can have the goal of healing the soul in preparation for our next life. And so I hope that you all will help us continue this conversation. It's important. It's one we want to normalize in our community. Thank you for caring, and thank you for being here with us this evening. Appreciate you.